A father ran through the crowded streets of San Francisco, wearing a wrinkled shirt, one missing shoe, and absolutely no money in his pocket. Just hours earlier, he had slept with his young son on the cold floor of a subway bathroom, hiding from strangers outside the door. But somehow, this desperate man was about to walk into one of the most important job interviews of his life. My name is Jessica Moore, and welcome to Jessica Recaps. Today we're diving into the emotional true story behind the 2006 biographical drama, The Pursuit of Happyness. The story began in San Francisco in 1981. Chris Gardner struggled to survive. Every day, he carried around a bulky medical device called a bone density scanner. The machine was expensive, difficult to sell. Each morning, he dropped off his young son, Christopher, at daycare before running across the city to visit hospitals and doctors. If he managed to sell just one machine a month, he could barely pay the bills. But most months, he sold nothing. At home, things were even worse. His wife, Linda, worked exhausting double shifts just to keep food on the table. The pressure slowly crushed their relationship. Bills stacked up, rent went unpaid, and every conversation between them turned into another argument. One evening during dinner, Linda asked Chris if he had paid their taxes yet. Chris quietly admitted he had asked for another extension. Linda looked devastated. She was carrying the entire family on her shoulders, and she was starting to lose hope. That night, Chris noticed a strange new toy sitting nearby, a Rubik's Cube. Curious, he picked it up and started twisting the colorful squares. To his surprise, he solved it easily. At the time, he didn't realize that tiny moment would change everything. The next day, while walking through downtown San Francisco, Chris saw a well-dressed businessman stepping out of a shiny red Ferrari. Chris couldn't help himself. He walked up and asked the man two simple questions. "What do you do? And how do you do it?" The man smiled. "I'm a stockbroker." Chris assumed it required years of education, but the man shook his head. The next day, he walked into a prestigious brokerage firm called Dean Witter and submitted an application for their training program. Unfortunately, his problems didn't stop there. While he was inside applying, the street performer he had trusted to watch his medical device suddenly ran off with it. Chris sprinted after him, but the thief disappeared into the subway. For Chris, losing that machine wasn't just annoying, it was devastating. But Chris refused to give up. He chased the thief across the city and eventually managed to recover the stolen device. Unfortunately, that meant he now had two machines again, the very thing he promised Linda he would get rid of. And when Linda saw them, her disappointment said everything. Still, Chris kept pushing forward. Weeks later, Chris spotted one of the managers, Jay Twistle, hailing a taxi. Chris rushed over and introduced himself. Inside the cab, Jay struggled to solve a Rubik's Cube. Chris casually asked if he could try. Jay laughed. Chris solved it in seconds. For the first time, Jay looked impressed. But Chris had one more problem. He didn't have money for the taxi fare. So when the car stopped at a red light, Chris jumped out and ran. Things were falling apart fast. That same night, Linda finally broke down. She told Chris she couldn't live like this anymore. She packed her things and left. The only thing Chris asked for was to keep their son. Now he was alone, a single father with no money, a failing job. There was just one problem. The night before the interview, Chris was arrested for unpaid parking tickets. He spent the entire night in jail. The next morning, he ran straight from the police station to the interview, wearing dirty clothes and no suit. The panel stared at him. Chris decided to be honest. He told them exactly what had happened. Then he asked one bold question.
If a man walked into this interview without a shirt and I hired him, what would you say about that man? The room went silent. Finally, someone answered, "He must have had some really good pants." The room burst into laughter, and somehow Chris got the internship. But there was a catch. One afternoon, while playing basketball, Christopher told his father he dreamed of becoming a professional player someday. Chris almost crushed that dream. He told his son it probably wouldn't happen. But the second he saw the boy's face drop, Chris realized what he had done. He quickly corrected himself. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something, not even me. It was a lesson Chris needed to hear himself. During the internship, Chris worked harder than anyone. He arrived earlier, made more calls, studied more numbers. The motel kicked them out, and suddenly, Chris and his son had nowhere to go. One night, with no shelter left, Chris locked himself and his son inside a subway station bathroom. Christopher slept peacefully in his father's arms. Outside, strangers banged on the door. Chris held the door shut with his foot, silently crying. It was the lowest moment of his life, but even then, he refused to quit. Eventually, Chris and his son found space in a crowded homeless shelter. Little by little, things started changing. He learned how to speak confidently with investors. He fixed one of his broken medical devices and finally sold it. His boss, Mr. Fromm, called him into the office. Chris walked in quietly, trying to stay calm. Mr. Fromm looked at him and smiled. "I hope you're wearing that shirt tomorrow, because you're going to need it." Chris froze. He got the job. After months of sleeping in shelters, running through the city, and fighting to survive, he finally made it. Chris stepped outside the building and walked through the crowded streets. Later that day, Chris picked up his son from daycare and held him tightly. That moment, that victory, that relief, Chris called it happiness. In the years that followed, Chris Gardner went on to build his own successful investment firm and eventually became a millionaire. And it all started with a father who refused to give up. Thanks for watching this recap of The Pursuit of Happyness. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to see another unbelievable story next, check out the video on your screen now. This ancient whistle forces you to kill or die. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.